Welcome back to True Echo, where real-life grit meets unforgettable justice. In today's powerful story, we follow a woman who didn't yell, didn't fight back with rage. She stood still, calm and unshakable in the face of abuse of power. And what she did next left an entire police department speechless. This isn't just about rank. This is about principle and how quiet strength can echo louder than any badge. The air along Highway 17 was thick with the hum of late-night silence. Just the occasional whisper of wind against treetops and the steady rhythm of tires against asphalt. Colonel Naomi Bryant sat behind the wheel of her government-issued SUV, her fingers tapping gently against the steering wheel in sync with the rhythm of the road. Her eyes were alert but calm, scanning the horizon ahead. Her black blouse, neat and functional, rolled up at the sleeves, hinted at a long day that had refused to end on time. She should have been home by now, sipping tea with her golden retriever curled at her feet. Instead, she was still navigating back roads lit only by the soft glow of passing streetlights. She wasn't lost. Naomi never got lost. After 2 decades leading military logistics through war zones, disaster relief corridors, and broken international supply chains, she had an internal compass that rivaled any GPS. She was simply late, a casualty of a delayed strategic operations meeting at Fort Braddock. Her mind was already winding down, half focused on the emails she needed to answer in the morning, when the red and blue lights suddenly exploded behind her. Naomi didn't panic. She didn't even tense. Instead, she did what she had trained countless others to do. She remained composed. One smooth motion brought her SUV to a stop on the shoulder. The engine ticked quietly as she placed both hands on the wheel. Her breathing slowed. This wasn't her first time being pulled over for no reason. It wouldn't be her last. But tonight something felt different. In her side mirror, a figure approached. A tall, broad-shouldered man in uniform, flashlight aimed high and aggressive. Naomi rolled her window halfway, careful to keep her hands visible. "License and registration," he barked, no greeting, no explanation. "Officer," she said evenly, "may I ask why I've been stopped?" "You were drifting lanes," he said flatly. "Didn't signal. You looked impaired." Naomi didn't argue. She didn't frown. She didn't move except to slowly retrieve her documents. "This is a federal vehicle," she said, offering both her license and military ID. "I'm a U.S. Army officer returning from Fort Braddock." The flashlight didn't move. Neither did the smirk slowly curling at the corners of Officer Brent Keller's mouth. "Military, huh? That don't put you above the law." "I never said it did." "Step out of the vehicle." Naomi blinked once. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Sobriety check. She could have argued. She could have flashed rank. But instead, she tapped the record button on her phone, turned the screen toward him, and exited the vehicle in perfect silence. Keller's jaw twitched. Not fear, calculation. He made her walk a line, follow his finger, recite the alphabet backward. She passed every test with clinical precision. Still, he handed her a citation. "Failure to maintain lane," he said smugly. She took it, folded it, tucked it beside her seat. Not a single word of protest left her lips. But as she drove away, Naomi knew one thing with unshakable clarity. That man had just made a mistake, one bigger than he could possibly understand. Because he hadn't pulled over a tired motorist. He had pulled over a storm in uniform. Officer Brent Keller liked control. It wasn't about law enforcement, it was about command. 17 years in the Greenville Police Department had taught him how to push just far enough. He knew which words skirted policy and which body cam angles worked in his favor. He'd stopped hundreds of people like her. Out-of-town plates. Dark windows. Confidence he didn't think was earned. He never saw it as abuse. He saw it as order. So when he laughed about the stop later that night in the break room, calling her some army chick who thought she was special, he wasn't worried. He didn't even remember her name. But Corporal Lena West did. "Wait," she said slowly, coffee mug midair. "You said Bryant?" "Colonel Naomi Bryant." Keller shrugged. "Something like that. Claimed she was a colonel." "She is a colonel," West said sharply. "And not just any colonel. She briefed FEMA Joint Ops last quarter. She's top brass, Keller. You didn't just stop a soldier. You stopped a damn legend." Keller paused, the smile freezing at the edge of his face. "So? She's got connections, Brent. And if you were even slightly out of line, she'll bury you." Still he shrugged it off. "I didn't arrest her. Just wrote her up." West didn't respond. She just walked away. And for the first time that night, Keller felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Back in her home office, Naomi sat down at her desk. The room was quiet, save for the soft exhale of her aging retriever sleeping nearby. She didn't cry. She didn't rant. She began typing. First the facts, then the timestamps, then the attachments, her phone footage, detailed field notes, a formal statement. She didn't send it to one agency. She sent it to 4. By morning, the wheels had already begun to turn. The sun rose quietly over Fort Braddock, casting long golden lines across the tarmac. By the time the first helicopters lifted off for the morning drills, Naomi Bryant's report had already landed in 4 high-level inboxes. Internal Affairs at Greenville PD, the Civil Oversight Committee, the Office of the Inspector General and JAG Legal Counsel at Fort Braddock. Lieutenant Commander Justin Cho, Legal Liaison for Fort Braddock, read Naomi's email before his second cup of coffee. His eyebrows lifted at the level of detail. Naomi's writing was surgical. Clipped footage, annotated timestamps, formal citations of federal traffic code, and a cool, methodical narrative of the entire stop. No drama. No anger. Just a masterclass in documentation. By 9 a.m., Justin had forwarded it up the chain with one line: "This isn't a complaint. This is a blueprint for accountability." Meanwhile, Officer Brent Keller was back on patrol, sipping stale thermos coffee, cruising neighborhoods, unaware that his name was now attached to a pending inquiry that spanned multiple jurisdictions. He'd told the locker room version of the story twice already, still amused by how she tried to pull rank. But laughter was thinner now. His audience wasn't quite as responsive. And in the corner of the room, a young officer named Davison just shook his head. "You know she passed every test, right?" Davison said low. "Yeah," Keller said louder. "And I still gave her a citation." Davison didn't reply. He didn't need to. The silence that followed said enough. Back at Fort Braddock, Naomi stood at the front of a logistics debrief, pointing to supply flowcharts and disaster readiness maps. She moved through her briefing with unshakable composure. Her uniform was pressed, her voice even. But inside she was watching the system. She had seen it play out too many times. A civilian pulled over. A young soldier talked down to. A woman in uniform mistaken for someone lesser. Too often, complaints evaporated into internal files, dismissed with phrases like insufficient evidence or standard procedure. But Naomi hadn't brought a complaint. She'd brought proof. Cold, clear timestamp proof. And she wasn't finished. That evening she met with Delaney Price. Delaney was a civilian attorney with a specialty in federal employee rights. She didn't chase news cameras. She chased patterns. Naomi handed her a flash drive and a printed copy of the formal complaint. Delaney reviewed the footage in silence. Then she said, "He touched your door handle. Without probable cause. He ran you through sobriety checks without cause. He ignored your federal ID." Naomi nodded. "That's unlawful detainment. Possibly intimidation. And definitely a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights." "I'm not looking for money," Naomi said quietly. "What are you looking for?" "A record." Delaney leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You're not the first person this guy's done this to, are you?" "No," Naomi replied. "But I might be the first one who can prove it in court." Within 48 hours, the legal wheels turned again. They filed suit. Bryant versus Keller. Filed in Pitt County Civil Court. Allegations: violation of constitutional rights, abuse of authority, unlawful detainment, and conduct unbecoming of a law enforcement officer. Greenville PD didn't respond publicly. But inside the department things shifted. Body cam footage was requested. Keller was pulled from field duty, pending internal review. An email went out across the department. Subtle but unmistakable. Something big was coming down. Keller received the formal complaint at his desk. It came in a plain manila envelope. Inside, legal jargon he didn't bother to read at first, until he saw the plaintiff's name. Colonel Naomi Bryant. His hands tightened on the edge of the paper. Across the precinct, Captain Mara Jennings called from her office. "Keller." "Inside." "Now." He rose slowly. As he walked toward her door, the buzz of the bullpen quieted. Conversation stopped. Eyes followed him. He used to walk through this place like he owned it. Now it felt like someone else's building. Inside Jennings' office, the blinds were half drawn. The light filtered in sharp, slatted beams. She didn't yell. She didn't even look up right away. Just held the envelope in one hand like it weighed more than it should. "She filed federal paperwork," Jennings said. "Internal Affairs. Inspector General. Department of Justice review pending. You're off patrol until further notice." Keller scoffed. "She's trying to make it political." Jennings looked up sharply. She followed every command. She passed every test. And she documented everything. She flashed a badge and expected me to back down. No, Jennings replied, her voice like steel wrapped in ice. She reminded you she had authority. You ignored it. Now she's using it. Outside, Keller's reputation began to erode. Quietly at first. A detective mentioned past complaints against him that had been resolved without follow-up. A review board reopened 2 closed cases. One involved a similar stop, same flashlight tactics, same aggressive posture. It didn't look good. And Naomi? She didn't speak to the press. She didn't post online. She continued showing up to work, leading logistics operations, mentoring junior officers. But at night, in the quiet of her home office, she kept building her case. Not out of vengeance. Out of necessity. Because this wasn't about one stop. It was about every stop like it. Every time someone mistook silence for consent. Every time a badge became a weapon instead of a promise. She didn't just want justice for herself. She wanted change for everyone who couldn't afford a lawyer, didn't have a rank, or wasn't believed when they said, "I didn't do anything wrong." And in a small courtroom in Pitt County, that change was now on the docket. 3 days before the hearing, the courthouse lobby buzzed with quiet speculation. The name on the docket, Bryant versus Keller, had begun circulating far beyond Pitt County. Not because it was high profile, but because it carried weight. Because people knew who Naomi Bryant was. And they were watching. Inside the Greenville Police Department, Officer Brent Keller sat in his squad room, a man diminished. His boots weren't polished. His back wasn't as straight. The badge on his chest still gleamed under the lights, but the weight behind it had shifted. He clicked through a series of reports on his laptop, but his attention kept drifting. The precinct was colder now. Conversations that once included him now paused when he entered. His usual confidence, the heavy-lidded smirk, the squared shoulders, was fraying at the edges. The final blow came when a younger officer named Morales asked quietly, "Hey, Keller, you ever think maybe she didn't raise her voice because she didn't have to?" Keller glared at him. "What's that supposed to mean?" Morales didn't flinch. "Means she didn't need to shout to prove she was right." Keller stood too fast, knocking his chair slightly. But no one looked up. No one defended him. He was no longer the one people feared, he was the one people watched. Back at Fort Braddock, Naomi adjusted the cuffs of her dress blues, her medals lined perfectly on the left side of her chest. Her silver eagle insignia shimmered faintly beneath the fluorescence of her home office. She didn't like drawing attention to her rank, but today was different. Today her uniform wasn't just for presentation. It was for truth. Across from her, Delaney Price closed a binder, the final prep completed. "You ready for tomorrow?" Naomi gave a small nod. "I've been ready since the night he touched my door handle without cause." They didn't rehearse speeches. They didn't practice outrage. Naomi wasn't here to perform. She was here to present a sequence of facts, filmed, filed, and now formalized into federal procedure. That night, Naomi sat beside her aging dog Samson on the couch. The golden retriever sighed and laid his head in her lap, sensing her thoughts turning. She absently stroked his fur as she watched the footage one last time. Not to relive it, but to remember exactly how it felt. The flashlight in her eyes. The dismissive tone. The hand hovering near the weapon. The moment he reached for her door. She didn't feel fear that night. She felt something heavier. The weight of a system that gave a man like Keller the confidence to abuse power without hesitation. The ease with which he assumed she'd fold, that she'd leave quietly. He didn't expect her to fight back. Not like this. The courthouse itself was unimpressive. A boxy structure with weathered brick, slow ceiling fans, and vending machines that rattled when walked past. But inside, on the morning of the trial, there was a quiet anticipation. People came. Not reporters. Not crowds with signs. But people who cared. Cadets from Fort Braddock. Law students from Pitt Community College. Veterans. Civilians. Black professionals in suits who knew this wasn't about one traffic stop. It was about all of them. Keller arrived first, wearing a charcoal gray suit that clung tighter than he remembered. His tie was slightly askew, and the palms of his hands sweated into the courtroom's wooden bench. He looked up when the doors opened. Naomi walked in, dress blues pressed, heels silent against the floor, posture upright. The courtroom didn't erupt. No one applauded. But the atmosphere changed. People sat up straighter. Conversation stopped. It wasn't just respect, it was reverence. Keller's smirk died the moment he saw her. This wasn't the woman he pulled over. This was a colonel. And he was standing in her court now. At the plaintiff's table, Naomi sat beside Delaney Price, who leaned in and whispered, "They're watching." "I know," Naomi replied. "Let them." Judge Celeste Hargrove entered the courtroom. Silver hair, sharp eyes, no nonsense. Her presence alone commanded stillness. "In the matter of Bryant versus Keller, Civil Complaint 2341C, she said, "we begin with opening statements." Delaney stood. Her voice was clear, calm, and carried the precision of a closing argument. "We intend to prove that Colonel Naomi Bryant was unlawfully detained, subjected to unnecessary procedures, and treated with suspicion not based on behavior, but on appearance. We will show that Officer Keller ignored her federal identification, escalated without cause, and used his position not to protect, but to control. This case is not about a citation. It's about civil rights. It's about what happens when power goes unchecked." Keller's lawyer, Mark Sutton, gave a cautious response. Officer Keller followed standard operating procedure. He initiated a routine stop. He had no prior knowledge of Colonel Bryant's credentials and acted in the interest of public safety. If any error occurred, it was procedural, not malicious. Then came the evidence. Naomi's phone footage was played first. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating as the video played. The flashlight in her eyes. The smirk. The clipped voice. The door handle. And her, never flinching, never raising her voice, never reacting, only responding. Then came Keller's body cam footage. It showed more than dialogue. It showed demeanor. His tone, his stance, the smug grin when she said "Colonel." The way he handed her the citation with a near chuckle after she passed every test. The jury didn't look shocked. They looked disappointed. Like they already knew how this story ended, and they were tired of hearing it again. Naomi took the stand. Delaney asked her to describe the night in question. Naomi's voice never rose. It never cracked. "I was driving home from Fort Braddock. I was stopped without explanation. I was asked to perform tests despite having done nothing wrong. I was dismissed even after identifying myself twice." "Did you comply?" Delaney asked. "Yes." "Did you resist?" "No." "So why do you think you were treated the way you were?" Naomi's eyes moved to the jury, not piercing but thoughtful. "Because I didn't look like what he expected authority to look like." Then came the cross. "Colonel, do you believe officers should ignore suspicion?" "No," Naomi replied. "But suspicion should be rooted in evidence, not assumption." "Could Officer Keller have just been cautious?" She leaned forward slightly. "Caution doesn't begin with a flashlight in your eyes and a hand near a gun. That's not caution. That's intimidation." The court shifted. The jury took notes. One of them, a young black woman, nodded slightly. Then Keller took the stand. He watched his own footage again. Saw the way he spoke. Heard the tone in his voice. Saw her stillness in contrast to his force. The prosecutor asked, "If you had known her rank, would you have acted differently?" Keller hesitated. "Yes, probably." And with that one word, probably, the truth crystallized. It was never about safety. It was about control. And the courtroom knew it. The courtroom held its breath, not out of shock but from the weight of confirmation. Keller's "probably" echoed like a confession dressed in casual clothes. It was the word that told everyone exactly what they needed to know. He only respected power when it came in the form he recognized. A badge. A title. A man. Naomi didn't need to rebut that statement. She didn't need to look smug or victorious. She remained composed. Her chin lifted slightly, not out of pride, but as if acknowledging something painful and familiar. That power, for people like her, always came with an asterisk. Judge Hargrove called for a recess. The jury would return after lunch for closing arguments. As the courtroom emptied, a murmur began to spread. Not loud. Not chaotic. But quiet comments among the off-duty soldiers in the gallery, whispered exchanges from law students, even the stenographer pressing her lips into a flat line of restraint. The truth had been spoken, not shouted but lived. Outside, under a gray North Carolina sky, Naomi sat alone on a stone bench while Delaney stepped aside to take a call. The wind tugged gently at the hem of her uniform jacket. Naomi watched two young cadets from Fort Braddock standing at the edge of the courthouse steps, uncertain whether to approach. She gave them a slight nod. That was enough. They walked over, nervous. "Ma'am," one began. "We just wanted to say, thank you. For this." Naomi didn't smile. Not quite. But her eyes softened. "It's not about me," she said quietly. "It's about what happens after me." The cadets nodded and walked away, heads a little higher. Back inside the courtroom, the afternoon light filtered through tall, dusty windows. The jury returned. Naomi and Delaney resumed their positions at the plaintiff's table. Across from them, Keller sat with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his suit wrinkling at the elbows. He avoided her gaze now. He didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man cornered by consequences. Delaney rose first for the closing argument. She didn't gesture wildly. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke like someone explaining a truth that had been proven, and now needed to be recognized. Your Honor. Members of the jury. You've seen the footage. You've heard the testimony. Colonel Bryant was not erratic. She was not aggressive. She was not impaired. She was pulled over for reasons that had nothing to do with traffic violations and everything to do with presumption. She was subjected to unnecessary field testing, ignored when she identified herself, and given a citation with no legal basis. She paused. Let that sit. This is not a story about revenge. This is about record. About what happens when someone who doesn't fit the image of power refuses to be dismissed. About what accountability looks like when it wears a calm face and carries proof instead of rage. She turned slightly to the jury. Colonel Bryant didn't escalate. She didn't shout. She stood still and let the truth reveal itself. That's not just composure. That's courage. Mark Sutton, Keller's attorney, gave his final appeal with careful restraint. He tried to paint Keller as a man doing his job. A longtime officer with no formal reprimands. A defender of public safety. Maybe he overstepped, Sutton admitted. But it wasn't malicious. But the courtroom didn't shift. The words didn't land. Because Keller had already said too much, and shown even more. The judge's instructions to the jury were crisp and neutral. The jury filed out. And the waiting began. Naomi sat motionless. Delaney turned to her. Nervous? No, Naomi said. Not because I think we'll win. Because I did everything I could. The rest is on them. Delaney gave a slight nod. She understood. In the hallway, Keller paced like a man trying to outrun something invisible. His lawyer murmured reassurances. Even if they rule against us, we'll appeal. Keller nodded, but there was a hollowness in his eyes now. A silence he couldn't weaponize. An hour passed. Then the jury returned. Judge Hargrove scanned the sealed envelope, adjusted her glasses and began. In the matter of Bryant versus Keller, the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff. No reaction from Naomi. No flinch. No triumph. Just breath. We recognize that the defendant violated the plaintiff's Fourth Amendment rights during an unlawful stop and detainment. We further find conduct unbecoming of an officer entrusted with public safety. The courtroom remains still. The court awards damages of $40,000 to the plaintiff, and this ruling will be entered into permanent departmental and federal records. Additionally, this ruling will be forwarded to the Department of Justice and Greenville Police Department for internal policy review. Delaney exhaled. Keller's attorney leaned in, whispered, "We'll fight it." But Keller didn't reply. His gaze was locked forward, as if he'd finally realized this wasn't going away. The gavel fell. The courtroom cleared. Outside, local reporters waited, just a few alerted late by internal whispers. Keller slipped past them, face half covered by a folder, refusing to speak. He didn't feel untouchable anymore. He felt exposed. Naomi walked out calmly, phone in hand. A notification buzzed. Verdict in your favor. Case closed. Delaney caught up to her. You could have asked for more, she said. Naomi shook her head. It was never about the money. Delaney studied her. You think it'll change anything? Naomi paused at the courthouse exit. Sunlight glinted off the silver eagle on her shoulder. I don't know. But maybe next time he pulls someone over, he'll think twice. And sometimes that's all it takes to begin a ripple. The ruling spread through the Greenville Police Department like smoke, quiet at first, then everywhere. It wasn't just the verdict. It was the way it happened. A colonel. A courtroom. A calm voice that unraveled a system with nothing more than precision and proof. Brent Keller was placed on immediate administrative leave. Not suspended. Not fired. But removed. His badge remained locked in a drawer. His gun stored in inventory. His access card flagged. For the first time in 17 years, he sat at a desk with no field assignments, no car keys, and no authority. And worse, no silence. The silence he had once wielded so comfortably, the hush that followed him into rooms, the discomfort that made people sit up straighter in his presence, it was gone. Now, conversation stopped when he entered, not because people feared him, but because they had already spoken about him. A memo circulated from the city attorney's office. All past complaints against Officer Brent Keller, closed between 2017 and 2023, are to be reviewed for procedural integrity and escalation trends. That memo didn't have Naomi Bryant's name on it, but everyone knew she had written the invisible ink between the lines. At Fort Braddock, Naomi returned to her command with the same grace she had always carried. No celebration. No announcement. She didn't mention the case. She didn't reference the courtroom. She ran logistics drills, audited emergency preparedness systems, and mentored junior officers without missing a beat. But within the ranks, word traveled. She had won. And not with a scandal. Not with a speech. With stillness. She didn't become a hero. She became a standard. It showed in subtle ways. Cadets saluted a bit sharper. Female officers held their gaze longer when speaking. Even the base chaplain asked her, quietly one morning, "What did it feel like? Taking them on like that?" Naomi answered plainly, "I didn't take them on. I just didn't step aside." Her inbox began to collect notes. One from a young female lieutenant in Alabama, "Thank you for making room at the table." Another from a civil rights advocacy coordinator, "Your testimony has already been added to our training packet." And one message and signed that simply read, "You made him look in the mirror." No one ever makes them look in the mirror. But with the visibility came the pushback. Not from within Fort Braddock, but from the world outside it. Anonymous messages. Online posts accusing her of pulling rank. One email ended with, "Hope you enjoy your lawsuit money, Colonel. Try not to play the race card next time." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because she hadn't played a card. She'd played a strategy. And she was still winning. Officer Keller sat at home the night his department issued the internal training update. Mandatory de-escalation protocol and civilian rights refresher. Effective immediately. The headline didn't mention him. The subtext did. He clicked open his department-issued laptop. Opened the footage again. Watched himself. The flashlight. The smirk. The words, "That don't put you above the law." And her, calm, silent, still. He muted the clip and stared at his own face. He didn't recognize himself. And the worst part? He knew exactly why she had won. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't cursed. She hadn't given him anything he could twist. And that scared him more than anything. Because that meant this wasn't an ambush. It was a reflection. Of everything he was trained to hide. Of everything he had convinced himself was normal. Of everything the badge had once let him get away with. Now that same badge sat cold on his kitchen table. And the system that had once whispered, "We'll protect you," had gone quiet. At Fort Braddock, Naomi began working on something new. A training initiative, leadership under pressure, integrity in unseen moments. It wasn't a class about lawsuits. It wasn't about scandal. It was about character. She built modules focused on conflict navigation, ethical escalation, and the difference between reaction and response. Her slides didn't include her own story. But her students knew. They knew this wasn't theory. It was lived experience. Rank is not armor, one slide read. It is a mirror. And the question is, when others look at you, what do they see reflected back? The recruits sat quietly through those sessions. No one looked at their phones. No one whispered in the back. They listened. Because when Naomi spoke, it wasn't just knowledge. It was truth. Officer Keller was transferred to internal desk review 2 weeks after the verdict. Some said he'd be pushed to resign before DOJ recommendations came through. Others speculated he'd be quietly moved to administrative processing in another division. Whatever the outcome, one thing was clear. He wouldn't wear the badge the same way again. If he wore it at all. Naomi never gloated. She never granted interviews. She never walked into a room expecting praise. But those who knew what she had done? They walked differently now. A female cadet who once sat silently in the back of training now raised her hand first. A quiet logistics officer who had endured years of belittlement now led her own unit with confidence. A young black soldier stopped Naomi in the hallway and simply said, "You reminded them we're not invisible." Naomi didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because legacy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it wears medals. Sometimes it walks into a courtroom and says nothing, but changes everything. 2 months after the verdict, the halls of Fort Braddock's East Wing were once again filled with new recruits. Their uniforms were still stiff, their boots unscuffed, and their eyes wide with the kind of anticipation that only comes before a life-changing lesson. Word had spread, today's lecture wouldn't be tactical or technical. It would be something different. Something deeper. They didn't know what to expect when Colonel Naomi Bryant stepped into the training auditorium. She wasn't in dress blues this time. No rows of medals. No crisp salute. Just her fatigues, standard issue same as theirs. She stood at the front of the room with her hands lightly clasped, eyes scanning the sea of new faces. No podium. No slides. Just silence. And then she spoke. How many of you believe this uniform earns you automatic respect? A few hands rose, hesitantly. One or two confidently. Most hovered in uncertainty. Naomi nodded slowly. I understand why. You've been taught that this patch on your shoulder, she tapped her sleeve, means something. And it does. But here's what they don't always tell you. Respect doesn't come with the patch. It comes from what you carry underneath it. She paused to let that land. You will serve in places where your presence is questioned. Where your orders are challenged. Where your silence is mistaken for weakness, and your identity for defiance. You will be tested, not just in combat but in character. And when that happens, what you do will matter far more than what you wear. No one shifted in their seats. No one looked away. Her presence had gripped them, quietly, completely. She continued. A few months ago I was pulled over late at night. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't swerving. I wasn't doing anything wrong. But the officer didn't see a colonel. He didn't see a leader or a soldier. He saw what he wanted to see. A murmur of recognition moved through the room, unspoken but palpable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I passed his test. I complied. And then I recorded. I reported. I didn't react with rage. I responded with record. She looked around the room again. Every recruit was leaning forward now. That man had a badge. I had proof. And when we met again, in a courtroom, I didn't have to say much. Because the footage said it all. A few recruits blinked hard. One wiped his palm on his pants. I didn't win that case to punish someone. I didn't do it to go viral or make headlines. I did it because leadership without accountability is just theater. Because silence, especially in uniform, is not discipline, it's complicity. She let the words breathe, let the air between them thicken with understanding. Someday one of you might be standing on the side of a road, watching someone with less power be treated like a suspect for existing. Or maybe you'll be the one in uniform making the call. In that moment, ask yourself, am I leaning on my title? Or my integrity? A long pause. This uniform is not a shield, she said, her voice soft but razor sharp. It's a weight. And your job is to carry it without ever crushing someone beneath it. She stepped back, hands still at her sides. No one clapped. But no one would forget. As the room emptied, a young recruit, barely out of high school, hurried up beside her. Ma'am, she said breathlessly. If that had been me, if I'd been in your place, I think I would have frozen. Naomi gave a small, knowing nod. Most people would have. But the point isn't what you would have done. It's what you'll be ready to do next time. The girl nodded slowly. Then she stood straighter. Naomi turned and walked out into the sunlight, not as a symbol, not as a victor, but as a mirror. A reflection of what strength looks like when it's worn quietly, calmly, relentlessly. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not forgettable. Officer Brent Keller officially resigned before the Departmental Review Board concluded. There was no press conference. No farewell ceremony. Just a statement of resignation quietly filed, followed by the closing of his personnel file, this time with permanent notes attached. In its final pages were citations not for service, but for misconduct. The verdict in Bryant versus Keller was now a part of public record, accessible to oversight committees, law schools, and federal training centers across the country. And in Fort Braddock's Officer Handbook, a new case study was added. Command Under Pressure, the Bryant Report. It would be required reading for all incoming officers. Naomi never asked for her name to be included. But it was. Because the lesson wasn't just about law. It was about leadership. Late one evening, Naomi sat alone in her office. The amber light from her desk lamp bathed the room in soft gold. She pulled open her drawer and took out a small envelope, a letter she'd kept since the day after the verdict. It was from a junior logistics officer stationed in Texas. Handwritten. Simple. Colonel Bryant. I don't know you. But I know what it feels like to be invisible behind a uniform that's supposed to protect you. What you did, what you stood for, means more than you'll ever know. You didn't just fight back. You showed us how to fight forward. Naomi folded the letter again gently and placed it back. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Because what she had done didn't echo with thunder. It rippled in silence. It didn't scream for attention. It reshaped expectation. She hadn't raised her voice. She had raised the standard. And that, in the end, was the louder legacy. This story reminds us that true leadership doesn't roar, it endures. Colonel Naomi Bryant didn't win by being louder. She won by being unshakable. She didn't just defend her rights. She redefined what quiet power looks like. In a world that rewards noise, she proved that composure is sometimes the most defiant weapon of all. Have you ever had to stand firm in a moment where you were judged unfairly? Tell us in the comments. If this story moved you, like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to True Echo, where real stories raise real standards. Because silence protects the powerful, but courage? Courage protects everyone.